Hi everyone, Floss Everyday here, the internet's busiest music nerd. And it's time for a review of the brand new uicideBoy album, I Want to Die in New Orleans. This is the long-awaited debut commercial album release from the Louisiana hip-hop duo uicideBoy. Scrim and Ruby joined up under this name in 2013, and it has been an endless string of releases from both of them since. Numerous mixtapes and an almost countless string of EPs, most of which dropped in 2017 alone, if I'm not mistaken. For whatever reason, the boys have just preferred to drop a bulk of their music in these 3 to 6 song bits, which is fine, but I didn't really have a lot to say about a majority of these EPs, as a bulk of what they released was pretty much just the duo continuously spinning their wheels in this revivalism of old school horrorcore and Memphis hip-hop, giving nods to everything from old school 3-6 Mafia to underground obscurities like Blackout's Dreamworld tape, delivering to audiences a lot of dark and murderous and blasphemous lyricism, parsed out into these rippity-dippity, rippity-dippity, rippity-dippity triplet flows. The uicideBoy formula is pretty obvious at this point, whether it be because you've heard some of the duo's previous EPs or you're familiar with the classic hip-hop albums that the duo pretty much use as inspirational source material. However, I Want to Die in New Orleans is maybe the first project from both of them that sort of stopped me in my tracks, where their usual predictability didn't get to me quite as much, and they actually managed to grab my attention for more than a track or two. Mostly because it felt like the vibe of this new project over here was a bit more distinct and freakish and in your face, and not merely a near anonymous group embracing some old school Memphis rap pastiche. But even though I think this album is pretty decent, I think a majority of its appeal is just sort of skin deep for me. This thing has a supremely dark and grimy vibe, very rough, textured, eerie, and aggressive production. The flows on this thing generally are pretty tight. It seems almost as if there is a slightly larger focus on hooks with this project too, some of which really pop, like on the track Nicotine Patches, One Day I'll Forget the Name, or one more that really stood out to me, Save me from this hell, let me rest in peace. Some of the melodic flows on the track Phantom Menace are really sharp. The rumbling bass and dirty drums on that track add quite a bit to its appeal too, but there are still a lot of very glaring shortcomings with what uicideBoy bring to the table here. Lyrically, it's pretty surface level with a lot of references to drugs and violence, with a slightly edgier presentation than what you would catch on any other rap record that approaches these very same topics. And the appeal of the lyricism doesn't really come down to a sense of humor or skilled wordplay, but instead being really morbid and grim. And sometimes it does work, like on the track Wartime All the Time, where it seems like the duo are writing from the perspective of a mass shooter who is also an ex-soldier who is addicted to drugs and suffering from PTSD. Not really an angle you hear all that often, and a lot of the duo's other lyrics also feed into these very authentic and potent and consistent themes of depression and isolation, also kind of embracing their outsider status in the rap game. But simultaneously, there are spots on this album where the lyrics can come off a bit too edgy or try-hard or basic, maybe even juvenile, especially on the track Mr. Nice Guy, where some of the darker and more violent themes throughout the group's lyrics also get mixed with some romantic bits, and it's a really awkward combination. And on top of it, for music that's obviously trying to build on the spirit of horrorcore, the album here, it's not very cerebral, it's not incredibly frightening. I do give it kudos though for just oozing pessimism and negativity. There truly is nothing nice or friendly about this record, so even when this album is lacking, it at least has that going for it. I guess another major downside to this project is that a lot of the songs on here are super short, lacking in structure. I don't know what it is about a lot of these new Memphis rap revivalists where they just have this need to slap together an intro, a verse, a chorus, and then end it, or an intro, 2 verses, and then just end it. If you've got good flows and some great dark production, it can bring a strong vibe, but in terms of songwriting and memorability, it doesn't leave that much of an impression, especially when you're killing almost 20 seconds in your own song by just rolling through a very faint vocal sample from another track in between a couple of verses. Something the boys do far too often on this album, to the point where it just feels like they're using it to fill out tracks. And it's certainly not a replacement for a hook or actual songwriting. But I guess the upside of all of these songs feeling very vibey is that it comes together as an album into a pretty seamless listen, but then the downside of that is a lot of these songs tend to blend together. I mean, I can kind of see why the duo have an aversion to longer songs with more structure, because some of the tracks on here that do exactly that are a few of the most underwhelming on the entire record, like the track Carrollton and the 7-minute closing song, I No Longer Fear the Razor Guarding My Heel, which has its bright spots, but it mostly just feels like a bunch of random songs that could have been placed earlier in the track list, mashed up into a long song. As the first 2.5 minutes of the track feel like a song, then it transitions into another 2.5-minute song. Then there's another transition from there into an outro. It just feels very disconnected, as there doesn't really seem to be a guiding theme that brings these different tracks lumped together into one track together. Yeah, overall I think this album is pretty likable, but it's not very standout, and I think the Suicide Boys continue to punch under their weight on this thing, which is a shame because there aren't a whole lot of groups out there doing this sound, reviving this sound, and doing it well. And even though I enjoyed quite a few tracks off of this project, I just don't see how Suicide Boys have really evolved that much artistically since they first started turning heads on Soundcloud. And they've certainly had plenty of time to advance, certainly as much time as other artists who started in a similar area in a similar time and were also influenced by some of the same artists they were, Denzel Curry. Hopefully now that the duo are putting themselves out there and taking this risk by embodying their sound into an album, they are ready to kind of turn a page into a new chapter and kind of grow and mature what they've been doing here a little bit and bring audiences an album that might have a more refreshing sound, has a bit more conceptual weight, or a bit more forethought. I'm feeling a decent 2 strong 6 on this thing. Transition, have you given this album a listen? Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you rate it? You're the best, you're the best. What should I review next? Hit the like if you like, please subscribe, and please don't cry. Over here next to my head is another review you can check out. Hit that up, or the link to subscribe to the channel. Anthony Fantano, Suicide Boys, forever.